Every year, extremely pretentious, expensive movies are released that expect to be widely recognized at the Academy Awards, only for most of these films to fail because they mistake grandiose, melodramatic cliches for heart and quality. And then there are times when movies that nobody has even heard of go on the Oscar campaign trail, at which point they'll suddenly start being promoted everywhere in hopes of being awarded some of cinema's highest honors. And while all of this can certainly get annoying, it might surprise many to learn that it wasn't always like this. There was a time when the Oscar bait movie didn't really exist, and it was mostly due to one particular movie that the current trend that I just described started. And today, I'd like to go over the history of Oscar baiting, and specifically the movie that caused it to become a thing in the first place and why, to the best of my ability. Because as I've stressed in many other videos, I am not a professional film historian or film expert in these matters, nor do I claim to be one. I'm simply a guy who loves movies and thus knows a lot about them as a result. So please forgive any slight mistakes or generalizations I might make. And if you're not comfortable exploring this subject with somebody of amateur standing, please feel free to skip over this video. Okay, so the best place to start in a case like this would probably be at the beginning, and that would be the Academy Awards' very first ceremony in 1927, because unlike the grand events they would eventually become, all of the winners were announced ahead of time and the entire ceremony only took 15 minutes. Then until 1934, the awards were given out in the middle of the year, as in June to December of 1931 and January to June of 1932 would be covered in one ceremony, for example, which needless to say makes cataloging winners and nominees for those years very confusing. But despite this bumpy road, right from the beginning the Academy Awards definitely did have some clout, mostly because it had been founded by some of the biggest names in the industry and thus the awards being given out did have some merit. So naturally there was some drama surrounding it from the start, with such things as the head of Warner Brothers refusing to submit Bette Davis for a Best Actress nomination for her performance in Of Human Bondage, Walter Brennan receiving 3 Best Supporting Actor wins in 6 years due to the involvement of the Extras Union who loved him, and the winners for the 1939 ceremony actually being leaked ahead of time, causing them to tighten up security on who got to know the winners. But by now you're probably wondering what all of this has to do with Oscar bait. That simply put, the Academy Awards was always a big deal from pretty much the beginning, but it wasn't as big a deal as it would become in the decades that followed. Rather than be the equivalent of, say, winning the World Series in baseball, it was more comparable to simply winning your team's division to go to the playoffs. It was something that most actors wanted to have, but it wasn't the end of the world if they didn't get it. Especially because the award often allowed those in the industry to become A-listers in their given field and have more pull with the studios and executives, thus making winning the award more a means to an end rather than the end goal in and of itself. It was more about what it meant for their careers afterwards, since now they had more power to actually get to do what they wanted. And though this attitude obviously diminished as time went on, the sentiment that it wasn't the biggest deal ever was still held into the 1970s, as many celebrities refused the offer to announce the Best Picture at the 1971 Academy Awards because they were afraid the then insanely controversial A Clockwork Orange was going to win and they would end up being associated with it. So as a result, the job was given to a then barely known Jack Nicholson, who loved the Academy and considered it an extreme honor regardless of the controversy. But this general attitude was about to change. Because the film in question that actually started the concept of the Oscar bait movie was The Deer Hunter in 1978, and even then it probably wasn't for the reason most would think, because Michael Cimino, the movie's director, was famously a part of the new wave in Hollywood and insisted on doing things exactly the way he wanted them, and since he had written and directed quite a few successful movies already, and taking chances on upcoming directors had worked out before, the studio gave him free rein to do what he wanted with The Deer Hunter. However, while the results were agreed to be excellent, the price tag it carried was not, because the initial budget given had been $8.5 million, But the strenuous production caused the budget to balloon to $15 million by the time it was finished. So in order to have even a prayer of making back its budget, since even if it was a great film, the premise was going to be a hard one to sell to general audiences, the studio decided to take a different route. Deliberately play up its prestige and chances at the Oscars in order to get the audience's attention. So to that end, they waited to release it until towards the end of the year, heavily played up the film as an Oscar contender, and only after it had secured a bunch of nominations did it get a wide release. And sure enough, this strategy worked, as audiences had their curiosity piqued and went out to see it in droves. And in the end, not only did they succeed in making back their budget with it grossing $49 million, but it also went on to win 5 Academy Awards the next year, including Best Picture. But as is infamously known, Michael Cimino's luck quickly ran out afterwards, as nothing could save the monstrosity that would be his next film, Heaven's Gate. But the point here is, the various strategies employed by the studio to make The Deer Hunter an Oscar contender, which I only barely scratched the surface of here, would go on to be used by many, many others in the film industry throughout the following decades, and would only be further intensified once the devil's favorite producer, Harvey Weinstein, became a mongrel in Hollywood and was notoriously competitive, using every tactic he could think of to get his films the coveted Best Picture award, even if they arguably didn't deserve it, with The English Patient and especially Shakespeare in Love being 2 of the best examples. By the turn of the century, what had started out as a desperate bid by a studio to make back its investment had snowballed into its own sub-industry, with thousands of people employing the exact same strategies they had in order to get their movies the prestige and honor that is the Academy Award for Best Picture. Only most of them are not nearly as good as The Deer Hunter, which was why they even attempted it in the first place, because they knew it actually had a chance of winning, but are often tailor-made to center around subjects that the Academy is believed to like. And the results are infamously cringeworthy more often than they are good, though it does still happen on occasion. But either way, yes, The Deer Hunter was really the first time a studio tried to give its movie dignity and respect through using Oscar bait and presenting itself as a prestigious film because of the attention the Academy gave it. And that was only to boost the movie's sales rather than because winning the award was the end game in and of itself. Because most movies made before The Deer Hunter that would be called Oscar bait now were more often than not made because that's what audiences wanted to see. Back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and even into the 60s, audiences were often captivated by epics and melodramatic films, so the studios gave it to them hoping it would make money rather than win awards. And if it wasn't to make a profit, then it was usually because the film in question was the passion project of somebody involved in the production. But either way, the awards it might end up winning were only an afterthought compared to what it said or what it could make at the box office. Especially because, as I went on at length about before, the Academy Awards just didn't carry the same level of prestige back then, so it makes sense that the goal would be to make money first and win awards second, rather than the other way around. It was only when a studio saw an opportunity to make money using the Academy Awards did any of them try their hand at Oscar baiting. And everything kind of snowballed from there until there was a whole group of movies being made solely for the honor of winning Best Picture, whether it ended up making a dime or not. Now, considering how disliked most Oscar bait movies are, many would obviously argue that things were better during the golden age of Hollywood when they simply made their movies to make money, send an important message, or simply to tell a good story, rather than obsess over awards from the very start and make films that nobody in the audience wants to see. Because among other things, such a method has proven to be very counterproductive most of the time, with many would-be Oscar bait films instead becoming the subject of mockery and being universally hated across the board. But as the esteem behind the Academy Awards has grown over time, so too has people's desire for recognition from it. That's simply the way of it. Because while it may not have always been such a big deal, it has become about the biggest honor anybody in the industry can ask for. The deer hunter may have started it all to make a profit, but it's ultimately become about a lot more than that, for better or worse. Okay, I think that just about covers everything. So now I'd like to hear your opinions. Do you believe that movies were better off before The Deer Hunter popularized the idea of Oscar bait and the Academy Awards became such a huge deal in the film industry? Or do you think it helps make award season more interesting? And did you have any idea that the promotional campaign of The Deer Hunter was a major reason that Oscar bait became a thing, or not? Whatever the case, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. Because I stressed throughout the video, it's okay for people to have different opinions. And if you happen to think that anything I said was wrong, that is perfectly okay. And I'll respect yours as long as you are respectful of mine and others in turn. And thank you all for watching. I greatly appreciate all of it. And I hope to see you all next time.